but mighty. And then I'll turn it over to Richard to talk about streamlining Windows 10 and 11 configuration in EDU. And I think you're all really, really going to like what he has to share. So again, today is December 5th. You are at EDU Endpoint office hours, so thank you so much for joining us. Just a few updates here. The biggest one is at the very top, so hot off the presses. We did announce this morning, we published a blog that outlines our plans for Windows 10 end of support, which, as you all know, is October 14th, 2025. So we are less than 2 years away from the end of support for Windows 10. So if you haven't started figuring out your plan, you're already late. You need to get a plan together to make sure that your devices that are going to support Windows 11 actually can support it. So hardware specs and things like that, you need to plan ahead for any refreshes that you may need to do. All the tooling built into ConfigMan and Intune should give you the insight into your environment about what devices are supported, so you can effectively get those upgraded. But in the event that you cannot get those devices upgraded, we did announce that we will have an ESU program, similar to the ESU program we had for Windows 7. So you'll get more details on it in the coming year or so, but we did announce today that we will have a program around that. So yes, Eric, that date is for every Windows 10 box out there, not just EDU, not just commercial, right? It's consumer as well. There will be no updates to Windows 10 come October 14th, 2025. Like the ESU will offer up support for security updates, but not feature updates, right? I didn't see if there was any mention of an LTSC. And it's definitely not into support for Windows 10 LTSC. I still think that's the 2027 mark. I forget the actual date, but I think it's 2027. And I didn't see in that blog a Windows 11 LTSC note. I know we made mention of that back in July. I think we kind of had a little blurb about a Windows 11 LTSC coming, but I didn't see anything in this blog today. I don't know, Richard, do you have any other context to share on LTSC?
No, I mean, yeah, the support for LTSC is 5x5, so 5 years extended, 5 years, or 5 years mainstream, and then 5 years extended. So whatever that date is, I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, January 12th, 2027. Thanks, Dan. So definitely go, if there's no other links that you click today after what Richard shows you, click that link, make sure you understand what's going on there. ConfigMan announcement, there was a TP release for 2311. And I'm actually interested because that actually brings ARM64 support for OSD, which is kind of interesting. So if any of you have a TP environment out there, I'd be curious on your feedback. And then a couple of just blogs out there, Skilling Stack for content delivery around DO and connected cache and things like that. And then a colleague of ours on the commercial side is doing a 12 days of Blogmas, just talking about random things in the endpoint management space, but they're all really good blogs, so I thought I'd share with you all. The last thing was last week, we also did host the technical takeoff. And this is all available at aka.ms/technical takeoff. And these are recordings from the Intune product group focused on very specific sessions. So like we actually had a session on cloud PKI. We had a session on enterprise app management, just about journeying to the cloud in general. So lots of really good deep dives and demos around really comprehensive of everything inside of Intune, including like Mac OS updates and things like that. So I definitely encourage you to check it out, spend some time marking that on your calendar. If you didn't watch them already, they're all available on demand at this link on YouTube. So check that out because I think it's a fantastic resource. I have not personally been able to watch any of them yet. My top of my list is Cloud PKI. But if anyone has their favorite session that they did watch, throw it in the chat and let us know. Before we turn it over to you, Richard, do you want to answer Jose's question?
Auto patch for EDU. I wish I could tell you that auto patch will be available for EDU, but we actually don't. It's not available today. It's something we're looking at for EDU right now, but there's nothing that we can announce around that. So, yeah.
Keep telling us, like, tell your account reps, if you have a relationship with an account rep at Microsoft, funnel this up, like, send them a specific email that says we want auto patch for EDU. Like, make your voice heard, not just to us, but to everyone that you come in contact with. We really need to raise it up to the product group and let them know that there's demand for this. And we'll continue to push on your behalf as well. But we are advocating for you.
Yeah, but let's clarify one thing with AutoPatch. So at Ignite, we made this announcement that we're like rebranding Windows Update for Business to AutoPatch. That doesn't mean that you don't have access to Windows Update for Business in EDU. You still have access to the same things that you've always had access to with Windows Update for Business. So deploying update rings, for instance, if you go into Settings Catalog and you look up the Windows Update for Business settings that are within that, you will still have access to the service. What you don't have access to is the automated auto patch functionality where Microsoft handles the patching for you. You are still responsible for creating the update rings, deploying those out, and all that stuff is still going to be there regardless of us changing the name from Windows Update for Business to auto patch. So it definitely confuses things. Completely understand that, but yeah. It's unfortunate that we don't have auto patch in EDU. We've been fighting for it, so we keep asking. And the reason why it's not available is because of what we call cost of goods and services, or cost of goods sold. The cost involved for this, from what our engineering team is telling us, is that it's pretty high given the discount that we give to education customers. And so that's the reason, is just that the cost is there. So what they're looking at doing is trying to do this in a more cost-effective way for education, and that's what we're exploring right now. But there's nothing that we can announce around this, if there's even going to be something there. So we're investigating right now, and so don't know that we aren't listening, because we definitely want to put this in education if we can. We just have to do it in a cost-effective way. So that's the story there.
Yep. And then I also had just one quick customer question this past week that I thought I'd clarify as well. Customer asked, from a Windows Update for Business perspective and some of the new capabilities that we have around driver and firmware servicing, that is included in Windows Update for Business. You don't need auto patch. You don't need Intune Suite for that. So just kind of related to that field, I wanted to call out if there's any confusion on the driver and firmware servicing. We actually did a session earlier this year on it, but that is included. You can leverage that in your environment. So hopefully that's not a common theme of people questioning that they can't use it. So just wanted to call that out.
Yep.
Awesome. And while we're on the subject of deploying update rings, I think it's a great time to transition it to you, Richard, about streamlining Windows configuration, inclusive of update rings. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Okay, then I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to let you take over.
All right. So I wasn't sure if Garrett was actually going to talk about technical takeoff when he posted his links. So I didn't see them in the initial links on the second slide. So he did actually talk about it. But what I did want to call out, though, is that as he mentioned, lots of technical content there. There are 39 sessions over the course of the 4 days of last week where we did this, all of them half an hour each. And so if there's a specific topic you're interested in, it's probably somewhere in this list. So I'd highly recommend, as Garrett mentioned, go out, check this out. Definitely worth your time. Our product engineering team, either the developers or the PMs that manage those features, presented on these topics. So go ahead and check that out when you get a chance. Now, as Garrett mentioned, one of the things that we've been trying to investigate, and we've talked about this in a previous session, is recommended device configurations. And we tried doing something like this with Intune for Education as a product. Now, for those of you that are higher ed, Intune for Education is not something that is relevant to you. But if you're in the K-12 space, Intune for Education, very simple portal. In fact, all of you guys actually have access to this. If you go to intuneeducation.portal.azure.com. And if you go here, it's a very simplified portal to deploy things through Intune. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but just to show, like, when you look at groups, you can actually see like a group hierarchy, which in Intune and Azure Active Directory or Entra ID, you can't actually see a hierarchy of groups. Where here, if I had in this tenant, if I had like nested groups, I could actually see all of that nesting. So I can get a visual representation of what my groups look like, very similar to something like group policy or Active Directory. And then from within here, we can go ahead and set policies and various things. But within Intune for Education, there's this express configuration setup. And the idea behind this was, let's just create a set of policies that that we think should be set on just about every single K-12 device that's out there. And so you would go here, click on Express Configuration, and then it would just walk you through a wizard of setting up a group of devices. So I go to specify a group here, and I choose any apps I want to deploy, and I choose the settings. And a lot of these settings are already pre-filled in for you, but it's not every setting. It's just very basic, very simple. In fact, this browser stuff doesn't even work for Edge. This is all related to the old Edge Chromium, or I'm sorry, Edge Spartan browser, not the Chromium-based browser. So a lot of basic things in here, but it's not all inclusive of what we really need in an education environment, both higher ed and K-12, because there's a lot of things that do kind of cross-pollinate between both environments. So what we've done over the years is, as we work with customers, we'll come into a brand new customer, and there's just some settings that you have to set. Things like BitLocker configuration, things for Defender antivirus, just a ton of different things that we know we have to set. And so a lot of us just have this stuff stored in OneNote. We've got it stored in Word docs. Some of us just memorize it and just know what to set. But we never really collected this information and put it somewhere where we could all leverage it. And so what we decided to do was, why don't we just create the recommended EDU device configurations for Windows 10 and Windows 11. And this isn't just for K-12. This is all EDU use cases can take advantage of this. And so the goal here was to think about, what's an easy way to configure a one-to-one device for faculty or students. Student user specific policies. So think of scenarios where we have shared devices like shared carts, or maybe even lab machines or kiosk machines, where students will go to those machines, and we might need to configure things a certain way if a student is touching that device. But if the device itself, the device itself is going to have its own policies, but then the student might need some additional things. So for instance, let's look at a device where a student's going to use it, but we want to prevent them from installing applications. So they can't go out to the internet and download Siphon filter, which is a common VPN filter that students tend to download to get around content filters. They want to download Discord, they want to download browsers, all sorts of things that generally are either portable executables or they can install into their local user profile. And so if they're not admins on these machines, they're still capable of installing these apps and working around some of the stuff that we're trying to prevent them from doing that. So we can target student user policies to them to prevent them from doing these things. And we'll talk about those in a minute, like what those are. But then shared cart configs, lab configs, a lot of questions that we tend to get is like, hey, what's the best way to configure my shared devices? We have shared PC, but there's some additional things that you might want to set. Or there's been some changes to shared PC where we can actually use OneDrive now, where in the past OneDrive wasn't capable of being used with shared PC because there's a local policy that we would set to block it. There's a long story of the reason why that is, but we now can handle that easier than we had to in the past. And then kiosks. With Windows 11, the kiosk story is kind of weird at the beginning because you had single app and multi-app kiosks that worked in Windows 10, but they both didn't work at the same time in Windows 11. So we're going to have some kiosk guidance in the future. We just don't have it documented right now. But with all of these settings, we don't know everything. There are things that you're setting in your environment that I may not have thought of, that Garrett's may not have thought of, Carlos hasn't thought of, Chenille hasn't thought of. All of these things, this is more of a collective, community-based sort of process here. So if you have things that, if you go through these and you say, you know what, Microsoft, these settings that you guys have are great, but we add, this, or we add that. Or what about, sleep settings and power settings? Like I haven't even included sleep and power in here. That's something I'm thinking about. I just haven't added those just yet. If you have settings that you want to include or think would be good for everyone, open an issue. You can do it directly from the GitHub page here or pull request. And to get to this page, go to aka.ms/EDU-DC. So it's EDU device config, EDU DC. That takes you directly to this page. And so the outcome of all of this. So when we deploy these policies, and what we're doing is we're actually creating a way for you to import these all into your own tenant. So you don't have to go through a big long table of all the different settings Microsoft recommends and go check them. We will document these things eventually. We've already started that. In fact, we had a previous session where I talked about a lot of this stuff already. But in that session, it was the documentation of the policies, not an easy way for you to import the policies. So we've documented some, but we haven't documented all. So we'll go back and document what we've already configured that you're able to import right now. So that's going to come. It's going to take, documentation takes forever, as you guys all know. So it's going to take us a while to get that done. But the outcome of
good thing you have Copilot now.
Yeah, I wish Copilot would be able to document all this stuff for me. But with these configuration profiles, so when you import this stuff, you're going to get configuration profiles. You're going to get some proactive remediations. You're going to get update rings. We're going to have some stuff for endpoint security. When you do that, you're going to see in your, just like in these screenshots here, you're going to see a bunch of these policies come in. Now, you might look at this and be like, man, this is a lot of stuff that you're throwing in my tenant. And that's true. There is a lot of stuff that we're throwing in the tenant. And the reason for that is some stuff has to be broken out in order for you to customize certain things that we can't automate. So for instance, for things like OneDrive known folder move, you have to put the tenant ID in. Well, I can't automate importing the tenant ID, at least in the process that we're using right now to import. We've got some ideas on how to fix that later. But there's things like your time zone. We don't know what time zone you're in, so you're going to have to put that in. If you're using delivery optimization with Microsoft Connected Cache, we don't know what your DO cache server is. So you'll have to put that in. So there's a lot of things that you just have to customize on your own that are just environment specific. And so you'll see, like in this picture here, it says general configuration settings, customize, and just general configuration settings. So you'd go into the customize section and customize those. And so there's some stuff in here for shared carts. So shared environments, like turning on shared PC with the recommended configuration settings for that. And then also turning it on with OneDrive for Business. We have to unfortunately use a custom policy for that because it's not in the settings catalog. So turning that on, and then also software update rings for the various different scenarios. So you have your shared devices with a user that would be present. Then you have shared devices where maybe a user's not present, like a kiosk device that maybe runs like digital signage or something like that. So we've got various policy sets for those that you can deploy to your devices. We also have student settings as well. So like I mentioned earlier, things like denying admin apps. So they can't run PowerShell, they can't run CMD, they can't run the new Microsoft Terminal app. And so we block regedit and those kinds of things. And then we also will restrict students from being able to run apps, like I mentioned earlier, being able to install things into their user profile or just download things in general. And so that's the student restrictions there. So what you'll notice in the naming of these is that in the name, it says device, and then it says student. So things that say device, you want to deploy those to devices. Things that say student would be something you deploy to a student user group. And so that's what the naming here indicates. Most of the things that you're going to be deploying will be device specific. Very few are going to be user specific. But this is just for configuration profiles. As we go through here, there's other things. So remediations. So for proactive remediations, I'm not crazy about doing this through remediations, but the easiest way for me to disseminate this and an easy way for you to import into your tenant was to use remediations for this. But there are two remediations that we include. One is for removing the built-in Windows apps that aren't education specific, things that just kind of distract from school or class time. So this is just a PowerShell script that runs. It detects if any of these apps exist, and if they do, we'll just run the script. And you can run this on a schedule, but the problem with doing a proactive remediation is that the timing of when these things run is not deterministic, meaning that if you're imaging a device or if you're using autopilot for a device, and when the enrollment status page is going through the process of installing your apps and everything else, these scripts for proactive remediations don't actually run right away. Unless you set the schedule for these things to be like on an hourly basis. If you set these things like to be daily, what I've noticed is that they tend to run whenever the time is for that thing to run for that day. So for instance, if you have it to run on a daily schedule at 4 p.m., which is the default, then the script won't run until that time. It won't run like immediately after you've done the deployment. And so you might think, well, why not just create this as a Win32 app? And you can, and actually that's what I would recommend you do. The problem though is that I can't, using the process that I'm using right now, I can't export the Win32 apps and then you can easily import the Win32 app. I have to provide different guidance on how to import the app or just create the app, manually. So it's much easier to just import these as remediations. And if you do use them as remediations, have them run every hour. The problem though with that is that you're running something every hour. So having something hit on the device every hour, which these things aren't that heavy-handed, they're not going to take up like a lot of system resources, but it's not necessary that these things run every hour. So you can use the remediations as is, have them run once a day. If you don't care when they run, you're just like, hey, the apps will get removed eventually. Like I'm cool with waiting, till 4 o'clock or waiting till whatever the hour is on the day. That's fine. And by all means, use the remediations. But the second remediation that I have here, I just want to call this out. The name here says Windows Update before initial logon allowed. Now, some of you have told us that Windows Update doesn't work until someone signs into the machine. So you might, during the summer, get hundreds or thousands of devices ready for the next school year. So it might be June or July, and you're getting your devices ready. You're putting them into carts, and those carts get shipped to classrooms. They're sitting in the classroom, and the devices are waking up every night, as they should be. They should wake up, check for updates, go to sleep. Wake up, check for updates, go to sleep. And that process works great during the school year because someone is actually signed in. It doesn't work so great when you've provisioned a device with either a provisioning package, maybe use autopilot self-deploy, and no one has signed into that machine yet. It's ready for someone to sign in, but no one's actually done it yet. So a device sits in a cart and just sits there, again, every night, wakes up, goes to sleep, wakes up, goes to sleep, never installs any updates. And then finally, someone signs in first day of school, and they aren't prompted. They may not necessarily be prompted for updates. They could be. I don't exactly know what the end user experience looks like on that first day, but that's when updates will be able to install. And so by that time, it's been 3 months. So you're going to have a cumulative update that's 3 months bigger than it should be because the Delta updates, it's just going to be 3 months longer. You then also have definition updates, firmware, drivers, whatever else that's coming from Windows Update. And then I think also even store updates, so store apps and things like that. So just a lot of things that haven't updated because that user hasn't signed in. So what we did is in the April cumulative update for Windows 11, there was a hotfix that was released inside of that update that allowed for a registry value to be set And so what we're doing in this proactive remediation is we're actually setting this during the, just during whenever the proactive remediation runs, we're going to set that registry value. So it's not actually even a policy. It's a registry value that has to be set in order to get these devices to update before someone signs in. So that's something that doesn't necessarily need to run right away. If that ran like a day later or hours later, whatever, machines will install their updates once that registry value hits. So you should be able to take advantage of that as a proactive remediation. So just wanted to call out on the remediations. If you do apply these and you notice, hey, the apps haven't been removed yet, it's because you're waiting for the remediation to just do its thing. And there's no way for you to make that go faster aside from changing the schedule to be, instead of daily, to be like hourly or something like that. Update rings, I'll talk more about these as we go through the demo. So I'm going to demo importing all this stuff and show you how to do it. We'll talk more about the update rings, but just it's pretty straightforward. You just have one-to-one devices, you have your kiosk devices, and you have your shared devices. Kiosk is effectively, we don't think a user is going to be there, whereas shared cart, lab, kiosk, that's when a user is actually going to be using that machine. And then for endpoint security, antivirus. So in the endpoint security node within Intune, we recommend any security settings that you are setting to be done in the endpoint security area instead of doing them all in settings catalog or doing them in like device restrictions or some other place. Sometimes there's like 3 or 4 or 5 different places where you can set a setting within Intune. But we recommend any of your security settings to be done here. And the reason for that is because the settings that you set here will show up also in Defender for Endpoint. So if you go to security.microsoft.com and you look at your endpoint protection policies that are set over there, they should mirror. What's over there you should see here, and what's over here you should see over there. So when you create a Defender antivirus, or in this case I've got 2. I've got one for Defender antivirus and one for Windows Security Experience. You would see both of these in the security.microsoft.com portal. If you were to configure other Defender things in other parts of the console, your security team won't see those things. So they might say, hey, you guys meaning you endpoint security people, you aren't setting up our exclusions, or you're not setting up this or that or whatever. And they may just not know because they're set somewhere else. So from a visibility perspective, you actually want to make sure that you're setting things here so they can see what you're doing. And if they're setting something, you come here to see what they're doing, because you may not be in their console and they may not be in your console. So this is that unified security experience that we're bringing to both products so that both teams can understand what the other is doing. And so I mention all of that because in here we create 2 things. We create a Defender antivirus and a Windows Security Experience policy type. And the Defender antivirus policy type here is really, it basically takes the default settings for Windows Defender, because Defender antivirus defaults are great. They're exactly what we want to have set, but an admin could come in and change it. And if an admin can come in and change, that also means that an attacker can come in and change settings. Now, ideally, I'd like everyone to have tamper protection turned on. But the problem with that is that tamper protection requires you to use Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And you need to turn tamper protection on in Defender for Endpoint. And well, you can either do it there or you can do it in Intune. But it's got to be turned on, but the device has to be onboarded to Defender for Endpoint. And so if it's not onboarded for Defender for Endpoint, then tamper protection will throw an error in Intune if you're trying to turn it on. It doesn't show an error on the client. If you look at the Windows device, the device itself is fine. There's no problems with it. But in Intune, you'll see an error message in your console when you try to turn on tamper protection. It'll just show that this policy is erroring out on all these devices. So what we do instead for those that don't use NDE is the Microsoft Defender antivirus settings that we have there. Those effectively set the defaults. They just enforce the defaults. So when you go into the Windows Security Center in Windows and you go and look at like what's set for Defender, it'll say that your admin has configured all of these different settings. So it's all grayed out. No one can change them. It's all, so it's not quite tamper protection. It's not doing the exact same things that tamper protection is doing. Because with tamper protection, there's more security that's put onto the settings for that settings. So it's all grayed out. No one can change them. It's all, so it's not quite tamper protection. It's not doing the exact same things that tamper protection is doing. Because with tamper protection, there's more security that's put onto the settings so that even an admin can't change them. In order to change them, you have to go into Defender for Endpoint. There's a thing called troubleshooting mode. You turn that on, then you can go through and modify the settings that tamper protection would be protecting. So we set the same things that tamper protection would be protecting in the Defender antivirus policy, which are basically the defaults. And we make it so that an end user can't really change those easily, but it's not the same as tamper protection, so don't think that it is. So this was something that was actually a little more confusing to set up than I thought it was going to be, but this is all done now, and so it should be fairly straightforward to implement in your environment. Disk encryption, we enable BitLocker. This surprisingly, well, maybe not surprisingly. BitLocker has been a common question from a lot of people. Hey, what's the best way to configure BitLocker for our devices? And I know on this call, we've talked about, BitLocker just automatically turning on for devices, and there's reasons for that. I'm not going to get into them right now. We could have a whole office hours just talking about that. But one of the common questions is, hey, how do I easily turn on BitLocker? And so what we've done here is we've created the policy that turns it on without any user intervention. It's all done silently. And so this has the correct settings for that. And even if you've tried to go through this on your own, looking through the docs are kind of difficult to follow because there's a couple different places to turn on BitLocker, and it's not 100% clear exactly if you're doing it the right way. So we've got those settings here to make it easier to set that up.
Hey, Richard, hang on one second. I know we were recording, but I just got a message pop up in the chat that recording has started and then it stopped and it's saving the recording. I still see a recording up at the top. Do you still see that?
I don't know. It just says I'm sharing my screen, so I have no idea. I've got the recorded icon.
I still see it recording.
Yeah, so do I. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and not do anything.
Will.
Do you suggest I try to stop it and then start it again?
No, let's just let it go. I mean, it says it's recording. Okay. I can only trust what the product is telling me.
Like if I go into the settings, it says stop recording. So I'm going to trust that it's a glitch on our side. So keep going, and I pre-apologize if the recording doesn't work.
Yeah, well, that would be the first glitch that we've seen. All right, so autopilot profiles, last one here. So with autopilot profiles, this is pretty simple. We just import two autopilot profiles, one for self-deploy, one for user-driven. If you were at my session last week in California at the site conference, I had talked about my recommendation for autopilot is to leverage self-deploy. If you're using Windows 11 and if you're using the later builds of Windows 11, I say later now, it's been probably a year or so since, but anything that's been released within this last year, if you're using those as your base image for Windows, whether it's being shipped from your OEM or if you're imaging the devices yourselves. Self-deploy seems to work fairly well now. A lot of the TPM attestation issues that we had in the past have gone away. So I highly recommend using that if you can. But here we also create a user-driven profile as well. But both of those have the word customize inside of the name. And the reason we're including that is because for your device name template, I don't know what you want to name your devices, so you'll need to put that in there. And so you'll want to go through and customize that to your needs. Now, for all of these settings, there's nothing in here that locks you into a setting. So you could always come into here and change something if you want. The only things that you must change are the things that say customize, because those just have things in your environment that we just can't automate right now. So go ahead and do those, and you should be good to go. So now, how do we do all this? So to import these settings, there's a community tool that's out there. Some of you may have used it before. The guy that writes it, he calls it just Intune management. It's effectively a PowerShell script that has a PowerShell front end to it that will import and export settings from a tenant. So this is great for, even if you don't use any of the stuff that I'm talking about. But if you have like a dev test environment, I know a lot of you guys in higher ed, even those, some of you guys in K-12 too, but I know a lot of you guys in the higher ed space have like a dev test prod tenant. And so if you're doing something in dev, or if you're doing something in test, you want to move to dev, go from dev, go to prod, this tool can help you easily move those settings. We've done some of this in product and Intune for settings catalog policies, but it doesn't do everything. So like I can import or I can export in JSON format the settings catalog stuff, but I can't do it for like a proactive remediation. Can't do it for other profile types within Intune. So because of that, we still kind of need some third-party tools that are out there, or you just write your own scripts or something else. I've got some thoughts on creating something that we manage as opposed to relying on a third party to do this. But for now, this was the easiest way to get this stuff out. And so what you'll need to do is download the script from this location here. And then you'll also need to download the settings that I just described. There's a zip file that includes that. So when we do this, what you'll end up with is you'll have, actually here, this Intune management master. When you go download that tool that I mentioned and you extract it, you'll have this folder called Intune Management Master. So go into that and then right click on the Start CMD. Actually, you don't have to run it as admin. I think you can just run it normal. You don't really need admin rights. And so what this will do, it's actually shown up on my other screen. I'm gonna pull it over once it's done loading. But it'll pull up a user interface here that shows all of your Intune different object types within Intune. Now, the first time you run this, though, you're not gonna. This is all going to be red, or it's going to just basically look like a mess. You'll need to authenticate to your tenant, and I've already done that with the tool, so I'm already authenticated. You'll need to authenticate in here. I explain exactly how to run through the tool and use it, so just kind of walk through the steps. And so after you've loaded the tool up, then you'll also need to download the zip file of the settings. And that zip file, it should be named with a v2.zip extension. I just changed it probably about 5 minutes before the call started to include some additional settings for Defender. So you can extract that zip file, and then when you extract it, it'll show you all of the different JSON files for the different object types. So like for settings catalog, all that stuff's here. And so you can just kind of go through it and look through what we're setting in the JSONs. Now to import this stuff. So in my tenant, I actually deleted everything. So I don't have any, I've got like a Wi-Fi profile here, but everything else has been deleted out for all the different profile types. So I'm going to import all of these things using the tool. So when you go through this the first time, it's going to ask you to consent for permissions. Do not consent on behalf of the entire tenant, just consent for you. Otherwise, because what it's doing is it's going to give permissions to the Microsoft Intune PowerShell app, and you don't want to give that. You don't want to give everyone permissions to use that app. You only would want you or the people that are in your business unit that are responsible for endpoint management to be able to have access to do these things. So that will need to be done. And then once that's done, you should see all this stuff ungray out as long as the app has permissions to these various object types. So what we need to do now is import. And so the zip file, once you've extracted it, you'll need to navigate to wherever you extracted it to. And so in my case, I've got this v2 folder that has all the JSON files in it. So I'll select that. And then when I go through and select the different options here, I'm not going to assign scope tags. I'm not going to import assignments. When I exported these all out, they weren't assigned to anything. So you shouldn't have any assignments anyway. However, I just, to be on the safe side, we don't want to assign it to anything. It's very unlikely that we would assign to the same groups, but just want to make sure that that's not selected. And you can keep replace dependency IDs. Don't think it really should matter, but you can do that. And then you can either choose the different things to import. Like if you only want to import a specific item type, you could come in here and say, I only want to import the settings catalog stuff. So you'd go down here, go find settings catalog and select that. Or if you look through the folder and you've seen everything that's in here, and you're like, hey, I know what's being imported, then I'll just go to import everything. So click on import, and then it's going to import all these objects into the Intune environment. And it usually doesn't take too long. Settings catalog is going to take the longest just because there's more items within it. And then once it's done, you should see the objects within your Intune environment. So if I refresh this, I'll now see all of those policies imported. Now, what you're going to notice that's kind of new within the last month in the 23.11 release of Intune is our software update policies or our update rings now show up as a configuration profile type. This wasn't a thing before until 23.11. So we now see those objects here, which is it's a little unusual. We haven't seen those before. So you can go through, click into them, and you'll see the different settings for the Windows Update rings. There's still rings, or your rings are still in their normal location as well. So if you go to under Update rings, like I showed earlier in the other screenshot, the rings are still there. So the settings are all the same as what you would normally expect. But in this case, I've imported various rings here. And so, you would target to the appropriate groups for these update rings. So none of these things are being assigned to anything, whether it's an update ring, whether it's a settings catalog object, nothing's assigned. It's up to you to come into here and assign, things to your devices. So again, because these are device specific, you would want to go add a device group, or you could add the all devices group if you want, and then leverage filters. And so speaking of that, if we go back to the doc, so we talk about how to import, we talk about what to target depending on what the objects are named. So for each item that starts with MSFT EDU device, you want to target that to a device group. For each item that starts with EDU student, target that to a student user group, like I mentioned earlier on the call. But there's also two other settings catalog objects that we create for removing widgets and removing news and interests. And the reason these are broken out is because if we combine them together and you try to deploy, you actually get error messages. I don't know if it's still the case today, but it was back a while ago, where if you try to deploy both of these to like a Windows 11 device, or if you try to deploy both of these to a group that had a Windows 11 or it was a mix of Windows 11, Windows 10 devices, you'd get error messages within the policy. And it just looked bad. So we break this out into Windows 11 and Windows 10 policies for news and interest and for widgets. And then we also create a filter. So in Intune, we've imported filters, just 2 of them, for all Windows 10 devices and all Windows 11 devices. And the filter itself is pretty simple. We just look at if the device OS starts with 10.0.1. There's some stuff here for the operating system SKU. I think the reason we included this is because, well, yeah, you don't actually need the SKUs. You could actually take the SKUs out if you wanted to. But yeah, so we're just looking at 10.0.1 for Windows 10, and then if it's Windows 11, we look at 10.0.2. So it's pretty simple. Seems to work pretty well. And so with that, with those two filters, I don't create the labs filter. That's something I made on my own last week, so it's not for this. But those filters are used for the remove widgets and news and interest deployments. So if you wanted to deploy the news and interest removal for Windows 10, then what you would do here is just pick your group. If you want to use all devices, you can do that, or you can use a group. Take the group that you want to use. Now, this group could have a mix. I only have one device in this demo tenant, but if I had a bunch of them that had a mix of Windows 10 and Windows 11, then I would want to make sure to include my device filter for Windows 10. So that's why Windows 10 is put in the name here. So that way we match this with our device filter. Alternatively, you could have a group of just Windows 10 devices. And if that's the case, then just target this to a Windows 10 group, and then you're good to go. You don't need to do the filter. So it's up to you if you like. I know some customers don't separate Windows 10 and Windows 11 devices. You just have one big group, or you have a bunch of smaller groups, but it still includes a mix of different devices. So if you need to segment things out to apply policies, you can use filters to help deal with that. So that's the widgets and news and interest. And then for the customization stuff. So for the things that we need to customize. So again, looking at the names of the policies that say custom, which for here, it's really just this one. This will have a number of settings down here that you would need to set. So like your preferred AAD tenant domain name. With that tool, I can't automate that. Now, if I wrote a PowerShell script, I could easily do that. I could just look for your tenant domain, like what you signed in with, take the UPN suffix, just add it here. So we could automate this even further if we needed to, if we were using our own custom tools. Now for delivery optimization, this is optional, but I strongly encourage customers to sign up for the Microsoft Connected Cache preview, which this thing's been in preview forever. It'd be nice to get it out of preview someday, but they're still accepting signups for it. If you haven't signed up for this yet and you're not using Config Manager, I'd highly recommend you do this because it's going to save you a ton of bandwidth. It actually speeds up your deployments because your content's local. So we don't have to go over the internet to get your Windows updates, to get your Intune content, store app content, all the stuff that comes from the Microsoft Cloud. Not all of it, but most of it. We can actually store it with Connected Cache. And so what we put in here are the Connected Cache specific settings that we recommend. But the thing you need to customize here is you need to put your Connected Cache server, whether that's the IP address or whether that's the FQDN of the server name. You need to put that server here. And so once you put that here, these are just the recommended settings that we recommend for using Connected Cache. And this DO min RAM allowed to peer, you might look at this number and think, wow, that's a lot of RAM, because that's in gigs. and the reason why this number is so high, and that this setting's even set to begin with, is because there's no easy way to turn off DO. There's no like off switch for it. So what you can do though is you can specify a minimum amount of RAM that's like so unbelievably high that no machine in the environment is going to be a DO peer. And so by doing this, what this will do is it'll force the clients to use the server as opposed to share content amongst each other. Now you might like your clients sharing content amongst each other. You might want to use this in tandem. Like you might want to allow your clients to go and use the Connected Cache server if they can reach it, but then you might also want to allow your clients to share content amongst each other with delivery optimization. If that's the case, then you may want to adjust this number to something else. But in most K-12 environments, we generally don't want to see laptops that are being used by students, sharing content amongst each other while the student is doing some work in the classroom. So to prevent that from happening, setting a number like this really high will prevent those machines from becoming delivery optimization peers. Now, there are other ways to handle this same thing. You can do hard disk space, so it doesn't have to just be this setting. It's just the one I chose, and so that's what's there. For OneDrive, this sets up known folder move, and it does it silently, but we need your tenant ID. So you'll need to go grab your tenant ID. You can go get that from Entra. Just go and grab the tenant ID string. In fact, if you just go to, oops, I didn't want to do it with that one. See if it takes me back to the right spot. Oh, come on. Didn't take me back to where I wanted to go. Okay. So you can go to Entra, you can go grab the tenant ID. I need to keep going here. We got 7 minutes left. So go grab your tenant ID, put it here. For personalization, desktop image wallpaper, lock screen wallpaper. This is the URL you want to use. Please make sure for the URLs that you're using for wallpapers that they're on web servers that are accessible. And that they don't have really long strings or spaces in the names or anything like that. Like we've seen that from a number of different customers. Like some people like to host, like with internal content management system, they host internal SharePoint sites that might have like the branding for the organization. Don't recommend putting stuff there. Windows has a hard time processing some of that stuff. It's best if you just put this on just like a regular web server that's publicly accessible, that's easy to get to, and make sure that the path isn't like extremely long. Just make it so it's somewhat reasonable that Windows can process it. And then lastly, time zone. So for your time zone, unfortunately, we don't give you a dropdown. It'd be nice if we gave you a dropdown. But you need to know exactly what the format is to put for your time zone, and that's not always easy. So the way that we handle that is down here. You can go into command prompt PowerShell, type in tzutil /L. That'll give you the list of all the different time zones in the Microsoft or the Windows format. And so what you're looking for is just using like Mountain Standard Time or Pacific Standard Time. If you were in Mexico, you could have parentheses Mexico. So you could pass it with that format. So don't do like Pacific Daylight Time or anything like that. Just use Pacific Standard Time if you're on the West Coast, and that'll work.
Shout out to Arizona. Arizona has a dedicated time zone because Arizona doesn't follow daylight savings time. So half the year they're in Mountain, half the other year they're in Pacific, I think. So
yeah, so if you go through this list,
if you're in Arizona, you probably know that, but when I started covering Arizona, I didn't know that, and it was a challenge. Oh yeah, there you go. So
yeah, so for Arizona, it's U.S. Mountain Standard Time.
U.S. Mountain Standard,
which is different than Mountain Standard Time, right?
Yep.
So yeah, so if you're in Arizona, if you are, I don't know how many of you here are actually in Arizona, but yeah, you have to do it different. You could do this, UTC -9. That's an interesting one, or -11. So yeah, so we got some interesting time zone stuff there. So that's the format that the time zone needs to be put in, which we don't. I think we tell you here it's the standard Windows name, but we don't tell you how to do it, how to get it. So that's the way to do it. All right, and with that, we've got just a few minutes left, and just some other things to call out before we wrap up. And I could say a few minutes longer if we got questions or anything. But feature updates. With the Windows Update rings that we include, the update rings will include feature updates set to 0 for deferrals. So the Windows Update rings all have a quality update deferral period of 7 days, but the feature update deferral period is 0 days. And so what this means is that if you were to deploy a device and that device falls into a group that this ring is targeted into, feature updates will go right away. So whatever the latest feature update release, so today that'd be Windows 11 23H2. If your machines are running Windows 11, they're running 22H2 or 21H2, you actually won't, or you'll get 23H2 immediately because you're not deferring that. And if you don't want that to happen, then what we recommend, I recommend all you guys do this, is go to feature updates for Windows 10 and later and make sure that you're setting a feature update deployment, because what this does is it tags your machines to a specific feature update. So the latest one is obviously Windows 11 23H2. But if for this school year, you probably started with either Windows 10 or Windows 11 22H2, or maybe even Windows 10 21H2. So if you started with one of those, you want to make sure that all of your devices are tagged to this release. And then later on, during like maybe the winter break or maybe in the summer, you decide, okay, that's when we're going to go to Windows 11 23H2. Then you'd come into here and make that change. But if you don't set this at all, then you're at the mercy of Windows Update. And Windows Update will just upgrade your machines to whatever the latest feature release is. So you want to make sure to do that. So for the update rings, the reason why we set this deferral to 0 is because our recommendations to you is to keep this at 0, but use the feature updates that I just showed you to set all of your machines at a specific release. But if you don't want to do that, and you want to come into here and modify this to 7 or 14 or whatever, again, you have total control here. None of these things are deployed to your machines. We're just allowing you to import them, and then these are the things that we recommend you set. The long-term goal for all of this actually is to get this into the product in some way. We've got a few different ideas of how we want to handle it, but it's not something that's going to be immediate. So for now, we're working on just giving best practice settings and just allowing you to import them instead of you going to like a web page or to learn and pick and choose the different settings you want, because that, as we know, can be overwhelming to do on your own. So with that, we're just about right at time. I don't know, Garrett, do we have any questions or what's going on?
There's been a good amount of questions throughout, but nothing stumping out. Let's see, David has a question. So if no feature update specific profile is set or not assigned to a device, then the update ring profile will act as a default.
That's a good way of thinking about it. The update ring doesn't really determine what gets deployed. It's more of how things get deployed, right? So the what generally comes through either the feature updates node here or the quality updates node down here. Now, this quality updates node is not what you might think it is. This is really for expediting quality updates. If you want to make up quality updates deploy faster than your deferrals or just faster in general, like there's a 0 day or something like that your security team's like, hey, we need to go right now. We need to go immediately. This has to go now. We can't wait for deadlines. We can't wait for deferrals. We can't wait for grace periods or any of that kind of stuff. We just need to go right now with this release. Then that's what this is for. So this is more of a what, like, hey, we're going to deploy this thing right now, this immediate moment. So these two are the whats, but the update ring is the how. Like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to defer? How are we going to do those things? So yes, that we will defer to whatever Windows update is just currently deploying. If we aren't saying fall back to Windows 11 22H2 or Windows 10 22H2.
Yeah, great call out. Really quick, I know it is time, so can we get some heart and applause reactions here for Richard? Just awesome work and showing this to all of us. I mean, we all love it and definitely appreciate your hard work on this. So this is awesome. Again, I made a comment kind of earlier, but Richard hasn't really said it. But if you can think about the FFU process that we've talked about prior and streamlining deployment that way, and then layering this part in on top, I mean, we really simplify and streamline the entire process, the deployment process end to end. So just phenomenal work. So thank you all for joining. There's a couple more questions, Richard, that we need to answer, but a couple of call-outs really quick. Number one, in 2 weeks will be our last session of the year. So we're going to have some feedback forms ready for you to fill out to let us know how was this year. Did you like the content? Did you not? What can we do to improve? All of that good stuff. So be on the lookout for that. And then, well, I think that was it. So we just have a few more. Oh, I was going to apologize for the recording. If the recording doesn't work, sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but it'll be great. Regardless, we may have to redo this again and just re-record it. So with that, if you have to drop, all good. Thank you so much for joining us. And then, Richard, we've got a couple of more questions here.
Okay, where are we at?
Jesse's question is, how do you get computers to wake up to do updates every night? I've heard this is a thing, but I've never seen it work.
Yeah, it depends. So, like if you're using Surface devices, connected standby, modern standby devices will typically wake fairly easily. It's not usually a problem. The challenge, I think, though, is devices that hibernate. If they do hibernate, usually that's after about 6 hours, then the device won't, depending on the hardware, the device won't wake up. So if you disable hibernate, that should allow the device to stay in S3 sleep state, which then can wake up. So over the years, though, we've also changed some things within Windows, and so this behavior may not work the way it used to. But if you're using shared PC, so if we go back into and look at shared PC, there's a setting in here for maintenance time. And we primarily want to see these really for like the shared cart scenario is really where we were designing this. And this was back like in, I don't know, 2015, 2016, when we were looking at how we wanted to wake devices in that shared scenario. So that way students, as they were taking devices out of carts, weren't being prompted to install updates. And so when we developed shared PC, we had this maintenance start time idea where this is where we wanted the device to wake up. And so the way that this works is that there's a real-time clock wake or an RTC wake timer that gets turned on in the OS. There's an option in like power config for RTC wake that turns on RTC wake. But then there's a scheduled task that runs through the maintenance time that'll then wake the device up to do the installation for updates. And so shared PC should handle this. I think it should still wake pretty reliably still. I don't think anything's changed there. But with Windows 11, things may have changed. I don't know. But the way that we used to see this work is that at like midnight, the devices would wake up, install whatever they needed to, and then they go back to sleep. We then made some change with Windows Update with, I want to say it was probably around 1607 or maybe 1703, somewhere in that time frame, where we would wake the device up instead of at this maintenance time. The device would wake up like probably an hour and a half after active hours ended. So if you had active hours from like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., which is the default, the device would wake up around like 6:30, and then it would install its updates and then go to sleep. That interacted with another policy called SetED restart. So there's been some like changes to this whole process. So if you're not seeing it behave, and you maybe had seen it behave like this before, there could be some changes there. So yeah, so if you haven't seen this ever happen in your environment before, it could possibly be because your devices might be hibernating. And so, yeah, so it's a very long-winded answer to that question, Jesse. All right, what else is there?
I think that's actually it. I just knew it was going to be a long answer.
Yeah, it's a very long-winded one. Someone asked about TinyURL. I think that's for the desktop wallpaper.
Yep, exactly. I haven't seen it work. I haven't tried it though. I don't know if you've tried it.
I don't think it'll work.
Because of the redirect?
I don't think Windows is very smart when it comes to how the desktop wallpaper URL option works. Like if you try to put in something that's easily accessible via the web, I really don't think that a lot of these like content management systems that you can upload a picture, but then you get a URL that doesn't actually have a JPEG, like it's not like a .jpeg extension. That never seems to work. So TinyURL, Bitly, aka, like I don't think any of those are going to work because it's going to be a redirect, and I don't think Windows is going to know what to do with the redirect once you've been directed somewhere else.
That makes sense. Okay, and then Isaac has a couple of questions related to user write-back. Well, let's see. Is user write-back a thing, or is it only password write-back and not the same as device write-back? And then the second part of that is with device write-back, can you delete on-prem servers?
Is user write back a thing, or is it only password write back? I think we can write back users.
We can, yep. With
Yeah, I'm pretty
Launcher
sure.
ID Connect, you can do that.
The
And
device-
password write back is not really a thing. It's password hash sync. So we're not actually writing the password back.
Well, unless you're using self-service password reset, and if that's what you're referring to,
Yep.
Which we will write that back. But the device write back isn't what a lot of people think it is. Device write back isn't an actual computer object that's being written back. It's a different type of object that's used for it's like Windows Hello scenarios. But the object type's not a true computer object, which is unfortunate, because if it were a computer object, maybe we could take advantage of some computer object authentication scenarios that we lack with true Azure AD join scenarios. But yeah, can you delete on-prem servers? You could delete. I'm pretty sure you can delete that object. But yeah, it's not something I've ever done. Okay.
Well, let us know, Isaac, if you need more specifics. Awesome. Great call. Thanks for everyone who stayed a little late. Hopefully it was valuable. I got a lot out of it, as I always do. So thanks for joining us. I am going to stop the recording. We'll see what happens, and then end the session and kick you all out. So thank you so much. Y'all have a great day.
Take care.
Great job, Richard.
Thank you.